Now that we've mapped and loaded our PK concentration file, we will go on to map and load the data for our specimen collection file. So here, if we now click Add, select our data type, which is specimen collection, and enter the file path name. Click OK. This will now present you with the mapping table for the specimen collection data file. Again, we want to map our source data columns to the appropriate data fields. And there's a couple of things to note within this particular mapping table. Firstly, the thing to note is that wherever a date is required, we must remember to select the appropriate aggregation function. We also need to note that although specimen collection date and time here, these are the actual date and time the sample was taken. In my source data file, this is represented in two separate columns, and in order to populate this within this field, we can enter the source data column name for specimen collection date, but we must then insert a comma and a space and then enter the header name for the column containing the time. That's important for that data to be populated. The other thing to note about this particular table is that although protocol schedule, day, hour and minute are noted as non-mandatory fields, one of these must be populated in order to allow the visualization to be presented in VA Hub. And the final thing to note on this particular table is that this last field here says date/time of administration of last investigational product. And again, if you were to populate this, it has to be populated as we've just talked about for the specimen collection date and time, where you add the header for the date, a comma, a space, and then a header for the time. But one thing to note about this data field is that currently, if the time is entered, it actually isn't visible in VA Hub. It's not actually presented on the front end. So we will now go on to map this table. So our study identifier is study. And again, as previously, because the data file has been loaded, you are presented with some drop-down options to select from if that's easier. So we're just going to go through, and I'm just populating now with my source data column headers. So the next one is visit date, and I need to select the aggregation function here for date, and mine is month first. Now, one thing to know about the specimen ID is that we mentioned that the specimen ID is also mapped in the PK concentration file, and this column must contain the same data. The data in the two files must match because the React tables will look for this in the database. Now we're heading into populating the specimen collection date and time. So this is the one where we will populate with two header names, so specimen date, and then a comma, space, and time. And again, because we have a date in there, we must select the aggregation function, appropriate aggregation function. And again, so in this source data file, it's represented as month first. The next one is specimen collection category, protocol schedule. So as mentioned before, one of these fields, protocol schedule day, hour or minute, must be populated for the visualization to be presented. Although these are non-mandatory fields, I'm going to populate all of these. Protocol schedule hour. And just note that this is actually different to what I've entered here. Protocol schedule in my source data column is protocol schedule hour. Protocol schedule hour is as protocol scheduled hour. Minute. And as mentioned earlier, although date and time can be entered here, only date is visualized in VA Hub, therefore I'm just going to enter the date. And again, you need to select your aggregation function. So mine is month first. So once you've populated your table, if you click confirm and save, you can see I've had the pop-up message saying that the mapping parameters for the specimen collection have been saved and it's been successful. So click OK. Now that we've successfully mapped our specimen collection file, we can go on and load this data. So if we click on Review the Data Setup, ensure that the radio button has been checked for confirming that the data is correct. Click Finish. You're now presented with the pop-up box asking you if you want to load your data. Click Yes. As the data is loading, it takes you back to your admin UI homepage. You can then view the success of your data load report by clicking on View Data Load Report. Click Refresh. You can now see that the latest data load has been successful. So if we click on that, we can see our specimen collection file has been loaded into the React tables. And if we move to the appropriate page, we can see that the specimen collection file mappings have been successful. As mentioned earlier, once the specimen collection file has been mapped and loaded, in addition to the PK concentration file, we should now be able to see the dosing and exposure view in VA Hub. You can check this by logging into VA Hub, selecting the drug program and data set that you've loaded the data to, clicking Start Analysis. And if we look now, we can see that the dosing and exposure view is visible. If we click on the dosing and exposure view, we can see that we now have the analyte concentration over time plot. As mentioned earlier, in addition, if we want the proportionality, dose proportionality and PK exploration plots to be visible, we must also load the PK stacked data.